for me, the analogy that works, I'm not sure if for whom of the listeners it will. For me, the analogy is you're almost going into a startup mode. So I have the luxury of kind of working on a startup with two co-founders right now and then also coaching teams. And in the startup, I am the one with the most product experience. Now, it is obvious that if you have co-founders that are equal, that you will have, and we're three, and we have tech, UX, and product, funnily enough, within the founding team, that you have to make decisions together. And so now, if you are in a traditional role and you're moving into a trio, you're almost moving into that kind of startup co-founder-like relationship, where you're all of a sudden saying, we make decisions together. That means that we have to foster to our individual weaknesses and strengths, and we need to see how we can make this together. And that means that if one person is scared to make a decision, it might take longer to make a decision. And that's okay.
Hey there, welcome back to the show. My guest today is Niko Noll. Niko is a software engineer turned product manager turned product discovery coach. He has learned product at scale, shipping value to 18 million monthly active users, and spends most of his time coaching teams and being a founder at Juttu, a tool that helps product teams talk to users every week. Niko is super dedicated and passionate about helping product teams discover value sooner, so it was a bit of a no-brainer for us to get together and talk about all things discovery. And in our chat, we covered a lot. We talked about the ingredients to get started with continuous discovery, the pros and cons of product trios, some of the dynamics of trios, and bringing user research on board, some practical tips to foster that collaboration that we all want, and treating product trios like a team of co-founders, which is an idea that I really, really like, testing assumptions rather than features, and so much more. So without further ado, Niko Noll.
All right, Niko, we're live. How are you today?
I'm doing super well. I had some great coaching today, and other exciting stuff is in the works.
Nice. Welcome to the Scandinavian Product Podcast. So you are a discovery coach. You have a particular passion for coaching product trios and at getting better at discovering value and in a continuous manner. So let's just jump in. What are the main ingredients that must be in place for teams to thrive in continuous discovery from what you've seen?
So from what I've seen, and I've, I guess, at least touched 20 to 30 product teams over the last 1.5 years specifically on this topic and worked in depth with 11 teams now. It's on my LinkedIn line, so you can always follow that counter. Basically, specifically on product trios and continuous discovery. So I guess where I went wrong, and I guess sometimes I didn't probe these things up front, is that there needs to be some obvious things in place for continuous discovery to work. One, there needs to be some kind of sense of outcomes over outputs. There needs to be some idea that that is a thing, that we're trying to get to outcomes over outputs of a team. Then there needs to be some kind of understanding that understanding user problems leads to better products, leads to better business. If I have to re-explain that chain of logic, then it's usually not the right time to start with continuous. These seem pretty basic, but I did this mistake, getting to a client and not checking whether or not these things are in place. Then you run into huge problems afterwards. And there was a third one I thought about when you asked the question. Trust. So, okay, there needs to be some level of trust. I call this like partially empowered, or I guess somebody else called it this way, but there needs to at least be some level of trust that the product team is able to make decisions, because in the discovery process, you will have to make decisions. I just had a coaching client this morning, a product trio, and they were questioning whether or not they really had the agency to make the decision which opportunity to focus on next. You can't always run this up the chain. And so if you want to do discovery efficiently within a product team, you need some level of trust, not just that the leadership has it, but also that the team feels it. So those would be kind of the three things that come to mind right away.
Okay, interesting. So just to recap for folks listening, outcomes, context in general, so people understanding the problems we're solving, why basically product strategy, product vision, all that jazz, and trust, so that teams feel empowered to make product decisions. But you even mentioned not just product decisions, but decisions related to opportunities itself.
Yeah.
Is that different? Do you see one bigger than the other?
So yes, opportunity choice. Let's say if you work, for example, in this morning, I will just take the example of this morning, okay? So this morning I worked with a team on an opportunity solution tree, right? So they try to structure their problem space and then the solution space subsequently using an opportunity solution tree. The question there is, okay, we've identified these opportunities and we have some evidence that they are valid user problems to focus on. Well, now which one is the most valuable to focus on? Ideally, you can derive this from product strategy, but there will always be a point where you as a product team need to make a choice. And if you feel empowered, to use this overused word, to make that choice depends on whether or not you have the trust from leadership and that you have the trust in yourself. So this is a very important nuance. There are teams that have the trust of leadership, but they don't trust themselves to make the call. So I would say that on an opportunity level, this is even scarier than on a, let's say, product level, because you could make a decision on, okay, let's create this feature this way versus this way. But pivoting to a different opportunity can seem very scary, very strategic, and very leadership-like. And obviously, you can bring it up the chain and like say, hey, we need help with this. But the question is, do you feel comfortable making these decisions within the team sometimes? And I think that is often something that's missing.
Interesting. Okay, so let's touch on the building trust within the team, as in trusting themselves. Let's touch on that a bit later. But now focusing on, okay, if trust is one of the key ingredients for us to be able to do continuous discovery properly, and that trust is between teams and leadership, I suppose, then how can teams create that trust?
The trust of leadership?
Yeah, how can they gain trust from leadership if they feel they don't have it?
Yeah, so maybe an important point here that I find is obviously the best way is the other way around. The best way is as a leader, you lead by paying forward some trust and then seeing if teams can fulfill they can make something happen with that. Obviously, if they then fail to use this trust wisely, and this is the same as with company credit cards. The easiest thing is you give some expense allowance and you see what happens. The other thing is you restrict expense allowances right away and then you have this huge process. So the ideal case is that leadership extends some trust. But now let's say we're in the situation where as a team, you're trying to either regain that trust or gain that trust for the first time. Because that's literally what you can control as a team. You can't just change leadership. So in that case, where you're trying basically to bottom up create trust to make more product decisions, it kind of goes back to the points that I mentioned before. I would try to check whether or not there's an implicit understanding within leadership that outcomes are what is important. And that kind of this user problem leads to better products being built, leads to better business outcome, that this is understood and that's ingrained. It's all about incentives. Leadership people are people too. We even call them leadership, like as if they were something abstract. They're people too. They have incentives. They have something they try to achieve. And I talk to CPOs that say, hey, my goal is X. And then I'm thinking, well, for the product, this might not be the right thing. But they say, well, but this is my goal. But my goal is to develop the product org, and but it might not particularly drive these outcomes. So you have to understand basically the motivation and incentives of the leadership and make sure that these kind of basics are in place. If that's the case, I think you can have a productive conversation. Because in the end, and this is what I always focus on with teams, is you're trying to achieve the same goal. If incentives are aligned and then there's no mishaps there, then you're trying to achieve the same goal. As a product team, you're trying to help the product be more successful. You're trying to help the users receive more value, and you're trying to help the company capture part of that value. And that is the same thing that the leadership group should be able to focus on and kind of agree that that is the focus. And just honing in on those common things and on this common goal, usually, in my experience, gets to the point where leadership's like, you get it. Sometimes with a sense of surprise. It's like, you get what we're doing here, but then I don't need to tell you as much. So no guarantee that this works. It depends on the person, the leader, obviously, and also on the person asking. But this is generally what I've seen working.
Nice. So clearly, leading with context will help at least the leader trust the teams, because if the leader feels that she has given the context to the teams and that context is understood, even better if the context emerged from the teams and there was a negotiation and a conversation, then of course there's an environment of perhaps even psychological safety for us to conclude, okay, well, we get it, we both get it, we all understand the why, go and solve this problem and discover solutions to solve that problem. And another layer that I usually find is if the leader feels that the team has the right competency with the right skills to solve that problem, that trust increases even further. So let's dive into that a bit, because I know you've been both writing and talking about product trios, and I've heard that you have some pros and cons, kind of some theories about about the pros and cons of product trios. Let's dive into that. What are the pros and cons of having a product trio?
Okay, yeah, this one is more of I stumbled into things than I thought about this very hard. It's just from my experiences. So I confidently put myself forward and said, hey, I saw product trios in a few setups. I'm happy to help whoever wants to set up product trios within their org. And then I did so a bit more and a bit more. And then I realized, this isn't working everywhere. And this is not as easy as I thought. And the questions that come back are pretty valid. So it's kind of more of a mix of experiences that lead me to say product trios are not a solution to a lot of problems. To make it very concrete, a product trio, and I think this is the fundamental downside I see with them, is that they are not, in my opinion, a framework. They are merely some loose organizational guide or some, like a concept. It's more of an organizational concept. So because it does not include how any work basically is structured within that trio. So you're just saying, instead of a PM doing things, you're saying there's 3 people that have cross-functional abilities and they're now meant to do discovery and product decisions together. Great, that's a great statement. That feels collaborative, that feels cross-functional. That sounds modern. Great. But what are the roles and responsibilities within that trio? What if there's no agreement within that trio? What if there's very different skill sets within that trio? How do you juggle work? How do you spar off things? How do you hand over things if somebody's on vacation, sick, or if somebody new comes in? What if a fresh PM comes into a new trio, doesn't have the domain context, but has the PM background? What happens then? There's literally nothing there. There's no framework in place. So you need to establish this for yourself. And so it is more of a loose concept of how to work together than a framework. What companies, and oftentimes CPOs, leadership, etc., says is, we want that thing called product trios. Niko, can you help us implement it? And then I have to say, and I more and more say this, I'm more careful with this. In the beginning, I was like, yeah, sounds great, let me do it. I'm very excited about this topic. Now I'm way more careful, and I'm like, do you need this? What is it trying to solve for you? Do you understand that this is not a framework? This makes it harder for a team on a roles and responsibilities level, initially.
I see. So, okay, that's a very interesting point. So what you're saying is, as far as I understood, the fact that this product trio concept exists, it's basically hindering people from seeing the purpose of it, and people are jumping into the framework straight away. Say, we need product trios because Teresa Torres said so. And then they haven't even reflected on, okay, why do we need these specific skill sets working together as a team, and which problem are they solving? Is that it? What you're saying is that people need to first and foremost think about what they want to achieve, which problem they want to solve, and in which ways they might go about solving it and which skills they need, and then
Yes.
investing in a product trio to explore a certain opportunity might be it, but it might not be the right solution. Is that what you're saying, Niko?
That's what I'm saying on the kind of on the, I guess, how you would get to decide to do product trios level. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So this is how you would get to the point we need product trios. That is an important thought process that doesn't happen usually. On this, on the other hand, on the kind of operational side, it is just from an organizational side, just a very loose term. So what it means is that instead of applying it as a framework that you can apply to a team, it is more of a wrench you throw in the team's wheel, even sometimes. Because what needs to happen is that this trio needs to find their roles, they need to find their responsibilities, and they need to find their ways of collaborating. And they will not have worked in the setup before, usually. And so even from a just on a team level, this is a very challenging thing to start doing if you haven't worked this way before. And it is not well defined. So product trios are not defined in a way where I can open up a book and I can say, within a product trio, the engineer is supposed to do this and this. It just says, and also let's say Teresa Torres reiterates this oftentimes, it's collaboration. You have to make the decisions together. And then I'm in 3-4 teams and they ask me like, yeah, I have a bunch of meetings, I have this knowledge, I don't know, like who's now making the decision, or what does collaboration mean? And what I get to is to the point that we need to figure this out on a trio by trio basis. Oftentimes they actually turn out to be quartets or something else. So this is also a thing. And so we need to figure this out on team by team basis. It's not easy to roll out. It's not fast. It's not scalable, because if the people haven't worked in the setup before, it's manual effort to get them to a point where they can work as trios.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so basically, the different roles within the trio and what they focus on, when all of that depends on a case-by-case basis, because different people will have different personalities, they will have different skills, even though they have the title or the role. They'll have different passions, they will be interested in doing different things. They will be exploring different problems. That one problem might require some more technical knowledge, another problem might require some more user experience and design competency. Is that what you are going for?
Yeah. So we definitely need to understand that it is a case by case and setup related concept, and that it's just something that can be learned as well. So that's the important part. It's a short-term pain for a potentially long-term gain for an organization. But it might be a short-term pain. That's the important part. It might be a short-term pain. So once these trio engineers, for example, I would just call them like engineers that work in a product trio, have worked in a product trio, I'm very certain they will find their roles and responsibilities within a new product trio quite quickly. But if you haven't worked in that setup before, it is quite challenging, because you're basically taking on your domain experience, your role potentially, let's say a senior engineer, and then you're taking on top some kind of UX research, product discovery, product decision maker role. And you need to mix those things, and you need to find a way with the other trio members to make decisions collaboratively and to share work collaboratively. And that is just some work, and that is not easy. And those needs to be discussions and agreements and so on. And that all needs to happen after you announce that you want to do product trios. It's not a plug and play. Maybe that I should have said this in the beginning. Yeah. It's not a plug and play.
Yeah. I like that one. That simplifies it quite a lot for folks listening that haven't worked with product trios, for example. And I should probably just mention, if there's anyone now wondering, but what the hell is a product trio? Well, that's product manager, design lead, and tech lead usually, or some variation of it.
Taking care of product discovery and product decisions together instead of, let's say, for example, the PM just doing it.
Exactly. So, but you mentioned, the classic pain, like who does what, and okay, well, we're now working together, fine. We're not handing over requirements and managing a project. We now have outcomes, and we're doing this continuous discovery thing. We need to work together. And then the classic pain comes, usually, in some of these more traditional organizations that haven't done it before. Why do you think this happens? Why do you think people get so obsessed with having to have clear boundaries rather than embracing the messiness of collaboration?
I was reading some kind of charter from an educational organization from the last century, and it said we don't want out of the box thinkers. We want great laborers, basically people that can work on a manufacturing line. I would make the case here that we have an environment where you have people that for 20 years, let's say, depending on how long they have been in the industry, for decades potentially, have been told that this is not really what we want to see, this level of proactive decision making, this one of kind of fluid roles. And I think it is a bias that I have personally, and that's why kind of I'm calling out that product trios are not so easy, is that I have a bias because I grew up in this world. I grew up in a world of relatively fluid roles. I never had this kind of factory line model of you just being told what to do. I am lucky. I mean, I worked on a construction site. There it was like that. But then once I jumped into tech, I've always worked in some kind of environment where proactive decision making was wanted. And so to be honest, I would dare say it's history, right? This is what people were told to do, and this is what the environments and incentives were aligned for. And telling them all of a sudden we want it differently is not a quick thing.
Mm-hmm. So I've seen in a few Scandinavian based companies the following pain. So you have a product trio working together, but then the organization is large enough to also have user researchers as a competency in the organization. And what I've observed is that then this sort of conflict starts. But who does what? Like we have user researchers trained on user research, on discovery, but now the product manager read 2 books and 3 books and is now claiming to own discovery. And then, people get frustrated, obviously, more from a design side. So from your experience as a product discovery coach, how do you see this collaboration going?
I see the conflict. I've seen it in several setups. My partner in life is a UX research professional, so I also get to see both sides of the front, both sides of the conflict. I think it's okay. Let me be a little bit controversial here. I again would say it's usually a failure of leadership. The reason being is that you're basically putting 2 professions at odds with each other. So what you're saying is product teams. You're hiring professionals for UX research. You call this the UX research team, wherever it reports to. If it's UX, if it's product, depends. Okay, and then you're saying to your product teams, now do this thing called discovery, which is, we call it UX research light, or we just call it UX research, but do it faster. So the pros are there to be really good at their craft. They're UX researchers. Their whole identity is wrapped up in finding insight, validating, falsifying hypothesis in a really good way. I will just use good. I will not describe. You know what I mean. They want to do it well. And then you tell the product teams you have to do it fast. And we don't care if it's done that well. Okay. Maybe you need fast and well for different things, but that's a leadership decision to say, when do we need fast and when do we do it well done? And so if you tell the simple solution, oftentimes, I think, is you tell the UX research team, hey, you're valued for your qualities. If we have high-risk strategic topics that need to be discovered, that need to be researched, we will absolutely rely on you because we can trust with a high level of confidence that what you find out is something we can base product strategic decisions, company strategic decisions upon. You tell the product teams, okay, we understand you don't want to wait 6 months for a feedback cycle to get something through UX research. We also don't want that. We want you to be messy, scrappy, and we want you to figure out things in a faster loop. We also understand that you will not have the tools and the time available to you to make this super high quality. And that's okay. That's a trade-off we're willing to take. Whenever you feel very uncomfortable with a bigger decision, please escalate us so we can or demand that UX research team can handle it, because they can figure out more critical, more strategic stuff. And all of a sudden, the roles are clarified and the need for both professions is clarified. If that was the case, I've seen the conflict, like the temperature of the conflict, immediately cool down considerably. That doesn't mean there will be no conflict, but all of a sudden, everybody knows they're needed for what they can do. And there is not this inherent thing of we are being made obsolete by product teams. So that is usually the fear, right?
Interesting. So in what I've observed a different setting of feelings, because you know you say to the user research, okay, look, this is a very important strategic opportunity that will require more in-depth research. We need to explore in a completely different level. Go out and explore. And what I've experienced is that the product trio, because it was a very important strategic opportunity, they wanted to do it. And being sort of, the longer cycles wouldn't matter that much for them in this specific case that I've observed. So back to your point, actually, it depends a lot on a case by case and on personalities and team dynamics. I guess you need to see what works for you and in the organization. That's the conclusion I have from your story and my experience.
Yeah, so I mean, I agree with you. That's obviously would have been the less opinionated answer. It depends. But I'm glad you shared your perspective. So yes, I mean, obviously, it could be the other way around, where product teams just want to take over the world and they want to take over everything. I think then you have a real conflict at your hands, because then the product team doesn't see the difference in value of research that a UX research team can provide. And one maybe solution towards that point is that I've seen is actually in a product trio setting to include UX research just more closely.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say that as well.
Yeah.
I've seen that in a different organization also here in Scandinavia, doing that. Basically, user research is part of the trio in a way, so it's not a trio anymore, and they don't do it for all of them, but for some more kind of high risk opportunities that they know will take more time, and as far as I know, it works well. They work well together and recognize that having a user researcher with them is basically a luxury. So yeah.
All right, are you a scale-up based on the west coast of Norway? Because if you are, and if you want to take your business to the next level nationally and internationally, you gotta hear me out. Have you heard about Slingshot? One of the world's best scale-up accelerators right here in Stavanger. I am part of the core team at Slingshot, and we have designed a super high-quality 12 weeks program to help you grow and achieve your ambitious goals. And during these 12 weeks, you'll be guided by a super talented team helping you with leadership, organizational design, mental health in business, strategy, value proposition, business modeling, experimentation, growth, marketing and sales, funding, and so much more. Look, it's basically training, coaching, and consulting on steroids, and it will be tailor-made for your growth blockers. So if you want to learn more, please reach out and I'll send you more information. I would love to hear from you and I would love to work with you. The next cohort starts already in August, so chop chop.
So let's get into some tips for some practical tips. If there's anyone out there listening, feeling some of these pains, some of this conflict, what are some practical tips that you have for them, Niko, as a product discovery coach? What can they do to foster that collaboration, to work together even better, and to reduce friction?
With UX research in particular?
No, not necessarily. Just within the trio, I was thinking.
Yeah. Okay. Yes. So within the product trio, in order to kind of collaborate better, I think self-reflection is probably the most important skill to have and to foster. Meaning that you oftentimes have a well-defined understanding of your own role from before you were a trio, and that, I would say, predefined role understanding or kind of bias towards how you act or how you feel, how you identify, or whatever you want to call it, that goes into the trio. So now you might have to reflect on some of those and see if they change. So let me give an example to make it a bit more clear. If you were a PM for 5 years and you're given quite a lot of authority in the sense of lateral leadership, but also in the sense of making product decisions, in the sense of managing stakeholders and kind of telling them no or whatever it might be, then you will gallop into this product trio potentially, and you will take the reins, and you will say, well, this is very easy for me. I would just make the decision. And what might happen is that you realize that if you try to be collaborative, that the other team members do not feel comfortable making quick decisions on their feet. They will ask a lot more questions. They will be hesitant. And you will get frustrated because, well, decision making comes easy to you. You've done it for 5 years, and you are called on to make fast decisions with imperfect information for 5 years. So now you're jumping into this trio and you're trying to collaborate, but you get frustrated. And the reason is that not everybody has the same context, the same experience. So what you need is to have a lot of self-reflection and patience that this will be different now. And that in some parts you might have to take, just be quiet, for example, or just take a step back or accept that decisions might take longer. And see kind of where you can play to your strength and maybe give the team confidence and say, hey, I think we can take this decision. I think we're good here. Or where to take a step back and let them come up with a decision. But in any case, it is not to gallop in and say, hey, I'm used to taking decisions. I'm the decision maker on this trio, because that's not going to work. Then you're not doing a trio. This is the particular role for the PM. I just gave this as an example. The same is true for UX. The same is true for tech. I think probably the most problematic role is to transition from a PM to a PM in a trio that I've observed, because it can be the most subtle shift or the most nuanced shift where you're changing kind of a little bit your lateral leadership role. So I think that's the most complex to observe, but the same is true for UX changing into a UX trio and engineers changing into a trio.
Do you mean when you say shift from before working as part of a product trio versus as part of a product trio, that shift, what do you think is all about?
Yeah.
What do you think is most important to do differently? Going from that traditional
that's a great
world
versus, that's a great question. For me, the analogy that works, I'm not sure for whom of the listeners it will. For me, the analogy is you're almost going into a startup mode. So I have the luxury of kind of working on a startup with 2 co-founders right now, and then also coaching teams. And in the startup, I am the one with the most product experience. Now, it is obvious that if you have co-founders that are equal, that you will have, and we're 3, and we have tech, UX, and product, funnily enough, within the founding team, that you have to make decisions together. I feel way more confident, and this is why this example hits close to home. I feel way more comfortable making fast decisions because I've been doing it for a lot of years. But obviously, I can't come into my founding team group and say, hey, guys, let's just do this. I mean, I can propose it, but I have to be open to people that own 33% of the company, that are equal co-founders, that I like as people and that I respect, that I will listen to their opinion, and that I will be careful that if they are concerned to make a decision, that I take this into account. It has to be a more democratic process than maybe in a traditional PM role. And so now, if you are in a traditional role and you're moving into a trio, you're almost moving into that kind of startup co-founder like relationship where you're all of a sudden saying, we make decisions together. That means that we have to foster to our individual weaknesses and strengths, and we need to see how we can make this together. And that means that if one person is scared to make a decision, it might take longer to make a decision. And that's okay. This is kind of the shift that I'm talking about. And this is obviously, if you've never worked in a startup setting before, this is new to you. And so that's why it's such an important shift and such a powerful one then, if you can make it. I've been very negative, I realize, over the last minutes. It's lovely when it works out. It's great. The pace, the level of collaboration, and just the sense of true cross-functionality and how you get to the solutions is next level. It's amazing. It's just not that easy to get there.
Absolutely. I don't think I've been negative. We're just pointing, maybe my questions have been more hinting towards the negative part of things. But no, but I totally agree. It's a magical thing to work together. And I absolutely love your analogy on co-founding teams, basically, because that is spot on. When you work as part of a product trio, you literally make decisions together. And I think it's very unfortunate when there is a product manager that feels she needs to make all decisions. And even worse, when people around her would ask her to make decisions or even kind of take a step back because the expectation is for the PM to make decisions. I think that's a very unfortunate setting and a clear sign of probably a dysfunctional product organization. So let's move into a slightly different topic. How do we evolve our evidence? So you as a discovery coach, you've seen quite a lot of teams running experiments. And I have to say, Niko, a lot of teams still get stuck or limited by user interviews and surveys. And there's a notion of techniques to explore that will help them increase their confidence. So in your experience, how do you help teams going beyond interviews and surveys?
So the most direct way I found is to work with assumptions, in case you aren't already. I hope you are. Meaning that behind every user problem that you see, there's an assumption on why that would lead to desired business outcomes. So at least there's one assumption. So you could write that down. That's the most important part, write down assumptions. And between every potential user problem that you've identified and the solution to those problems, there are assumptions on why the solution will actually solve the problem. So those are usually 2 layers of assumptions that you're layering on top of each other that are from the actual change in the user's experience and behavior to the business outcome. Okay, so that's the whole tree. There's assumptions there. Write those assumptions down. I'll get to the experiments. Now, if you have those assumptions, then you don't think in features anymore. You think in assumptions. And now the question is, how do you test those assumptions? How do you learn more about the things you're assuming are true? You can also turn it around and say, okay, if we were wrong, what would we have to find out there? Inversion, that can help a lot as well. So, maybe let's take an example. We are assuming that that Bluetooth headphones are better than wired ones, and because the problem is that I always have to move around while podcasting and walk around the room. Okay, the assumption is that I want to walk around the room while podcasting. Now, then you think in assumptions and you don't think in testing headphones. The only thing you need to find out is whether or not I want to walk around a room while podcasting. You don't need to test headphones. You don't need to test Bluetooth technology. That's all you need to test for. So that's just to try to help you understand. You don't need to test the headphones. You need to test the assumption. Now, that takes a long time to get into teams in case they haven't worked this way yet. It takes a bunch of my time. Once you are there, you can way more easily select different modalities for your experimentation because you're not talking about testing features anymore, you're talking about testing assumptions. So if you're trying to figure out whether or not an assumption is true, there's evidence towards or against it, then all of a sudden surveys seem like, well, it's a good tool sometimes if you can ask the relevant people to a big amount. But all of a sudden, you could maybe even add something to your product because you don't need to test the whole feature. You can just see if the assumption is true, people would expect this and this, and you can work with fake door. You can do lighter A/B tests because you're not A/B testing the features. You're A/B testing the assumptions. So an example. Well, this is a pretty basic example, but an example that you could take is we had channels of communication with a client recently, and the point was, hey, people are getting this information via mail, but they're not opening their mail, and so they're not getting this information. Okay, but it's important information, and so there was assumptions being made that, well, if we could just send them an SMS, everything would be fine and dandy. Now, then they made assumptions about this idea, right? We sent them SMS. Now, the first assumption was that we can get their phone numbers. We are legally allowed to send them emails. Okay, there's nothing to test there. These are basically feasibility questions that are to be answered within the org. Then there was the question towards the user, which is the assumption that people would actually check their phone instead of their email. And so in this case, what they tested was not to send them an SMS, not to send them a text, but to figure out whether or not in the time they wouldn't check their email, they would check their phone. And because it was all about work-related information, it was also the work phone number that they would have sent this SMS to. And so there was no difference at all in the receivership because it's the same device. It's the same. It's both work communication. So then what they got to was assumptions, and then they didn't need to validate whether or not they could send out 15,000 SMS and see the opening rate. What they need to validate is whether or not the people would receive those SMS on different devices. So basically, what I'm saying is there's a bunch of modalities you can choose from once you talk about assumptions because you're doing way lighter experimentations, way more narrow, like a lot more specific, and user interviews go broad and wide, and surveys go broad and wide, and you can be very, very narrow with it.
Very good. Absolutely agree. Thinking assumptions first is a game changer, completely. It really shifts the conversation completely. And so the question here is, and tapping a bit into what we talked about in the beginning, how can you as a leader, if they're not in a position to hire a discovery coach like you, and they have, let's say, you're a product leader with 5 different product teams, and you want to foster this culture of discovery when people are thinking about assumptions and are making evidence-based decisions and are thinking about confidence levels, meaning that they know 1 or 2 user interviews will not be enough evidence for us to make a certain decision. If you are in that space, how can you actually practically foster that great culture of discovery in your company, Niko?
So, first of all, I would say it's not easy to create knowledge that isn't there, to create ways of working that aren't there. That's pretty obvious. I actually didn't think that product discovery coaches were needed as much as I kind of also stumbled into this one and I realized, well, there is quite some need for it, and I was kind of surprised. But now I'm not anymore, and I understand more about the industry. Anyway, though, I don't think that product discovery coaches are absolutely not a thing that will be around forever. You basically just need a few people that have the understanding in order to kind of spread it within the org and to spread it within the team. So I think that it's absolutely possible to foster a sense of a culture of experimentation without getting external help. So how? The simplest, highest leverage activity you can do is create time and space for product teams or product trios, if you have them, to play around with experimentation. Experimentation is per definition, I would say, a partially creative process. It's not usually very scientific within the product development workflow. I mean, it can be, but usually it's not if you're not called Google or something very big. And so what you need is you need to create space for that to happen. So you give the books, you give the resources, and then you say, hey, I will set you, and we did this in the past with a client, it's like, your goal is to do at least 2 experiments this quarter. And you have an OKR, but this is also part of your goal set. And you will create, like, you take the time you need for this. And we don't expect big results. You need to start somewhere. And if you can't get external help to get teams on this quickly and basically hit the ground running, you need to create space for them to learn it themselves and to experiment on experimentation themselves. And so the easiest way to do this is to say, here are some talks, here's some tactical kind of guides that we have, and then please implement at least 2 experiments this quarter. And take the space to do that. You have my backup. This is the easiest way to kind of foster a playful attitude around finding out where we are wrong, because that's basically what we're doing. People are not used to finding out that they're wrong. They ship stuff. I did this. Built something for 6 months with 3 software teams, shipped it, found out 19 months later that we were wrong, but I was already in another team by then. So it was pretty chill for me, you know, like I found out. So what I'm saying is they need to be comfortable with figuring out that they're wrong faster. And so give them that space, tell them, hey, do two experiments, try different modalities, and don't expect the world from it. But ideally, what you do is you figure out one thing you were wrong about. So you thought this would solve something, you found out it wouldn't. And you found that out before you built it and implemented and shipped it. And that would be the goal. And I think if teams can embrace that attitude and can embrace that, I think they can have fun with it. And that's usually the best way for it to stick.
Nice. I like that, having a recurring conversation about the one thing we did wrong and the one thing we've learned from it. That's a great habit in general to have. I would also add to your answer that, of course, in an ideal scenario, the organization has great, strong product leaders who can actually coach the teams, and kind of really just coach and unblock, basically. Yeah. But in a lot of traditional organizations that are still operating on a project basis, which is quite common in Scandinavia as well, in Europe in general, these leaders, I find them to be very motivated, well-intentioned, but lacking the skills because they haven't done it, they haven't been there and observed what great looks like. So what I think helps is for them to be part of this learning process as well. As in, let's all get together as a whole team, learn, experiment, write hypotheses, going through the basic steps together so that the leaders get also up to speed with these things. Of course, assuming that they can't bring anyone external to help them step up their game a bit more easily.
And one practical application of that, because I think it's a great idea, Alfonso. So one practical application of this that I found work really well is what I sometimes call with clients now is like a discovery week. And so the whole idea is that instead of assuming that this will become the natural kind of part of the daily workflow of the team and day one, what you do is at the beginning of a quarter or somewhere around the goal setting time, after you set maybe the objective and key results or whatever you work with, is to take a week or take 3 days and say the team, now they do their discovery. They start with their discovery because in the beginning they will be completely lost. And this is usually where leadership can step in very easily and say, okay, there's a room here. There are three days there and there. They're going to start with the objective and they're going to get to some solutions and they're going to set up some hypotheses and then they're going to run the experimentations of the weeks afterwards. So this is usually a very condensed format. I actually wanted to share the structure of how I usually set it up shortly on LinkedIn. I'll just share it in the next weeks. And so I can also send you the link. It's basically just a more condensed format. It's a rethink of the design sprint, but as a discovery sprint. And usually this is a very easily self-teachable format that I didn't invent. It's a slight redo of something that's out there, and where leadership can really jump in and say, hey, I can partake in this session, but I can jump out again, and I can kind of catch up as well again. So I think there's some purpose in making this a conscious kind of blocked effort, because this is usually where leadership, and I think that's a great point from you, can jump in more naturally, instead of kind of being there over the quarter every now and then, jump into the details and the weeds with the team. That's really hard for a leader usually to do. Obviously great if it works out, but the more blocked approach has worked wonders for me and the last quarters.
Cool. Niko, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Where can people find you?
Well, the obvious place is LinkedIn, because I've spent too much of my time after work there. Otherwise, at nikonoll.com. Reach out if you have any questions. If that wasn't obvious, I love talking about this stuff a bit too much. Reach out with any questions you have.
Amazing. Make sure you reach out to Niko. All right, Niko, such a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
All right, that was it for today. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Make sure you subscribe to my newsletter so you don't miss out, and see you next time.